Thank you so much, esteemed audience, for joining us for this session on lessons from evaluation for the new FCV strategy, uh, organized together with the FCV group. Nabila is here and many other colleagues from the FCV group. And from IEG, I'm here with my colleagues. And I wanted to first introduce everyone that will participating here in moderating and presenting. And just to say a few words about our discussant, Nabila, she is in the FCV group, a manager, and they was a main driver of the new FCV strategy design and is very experienced working in FCS context. But also you have a lot of background in private sector development, value chains, and all kinds of interesting, deeper technical knowledge that I'm sure is interacting a lot with the FCV work that you're doing. And I know you will move on to very soon as the operations manager for the Egypt office. So that is Nabila, who kindly agreed to join us today. And my colleague, Stefan Wagner, he is an evaluator, a very experienced evaluator in IEG, who led many of our key thematic and country program evaluations, for instance, the Somalia country program evaluations, which is of course an FCV country and focuses a lot around state building. And he also led the FCV strategy evaluation itself. And he will be the main presenter of the content today. And my name is Birgit Hansen. I'm the manager at the independent evaluation group of the bank that is looking at all country program evaluations. So my unit covers all the country program evaluations that we do globally, but also all evaluations related to economic management, so prosperity in our bank talk, and also on FCV. Okay. And I'm really glad you're here. I hope it will be a lively session. So the idea is that we first present the key findings from the FCV strategy evaluation. And then I hand it to Nabila to have a response to the findings that we, of course, discussed in much detail with her team throughout the process of the evaluation, but also afterwards before it was presented at our board. But she will also reflect a bit on how these findings were incorporated or addressed in the new FCV strategy that just was discussed at the board last week. And I'm sure everybody's very excited to hear more about that as well. And then we have quite a bit of time set aside for Q&A. So we really would like to hear your questions and also your concerns. We have a large audience connected. I can see 68 people or 69. Oh, it's changing all the time. So thank you. And we will make sure that we can have participation from the room, but also from the online audience. And I just really want to applaud the Fragility Forum for making this possible, this virtual participation for not everybody that can be here in the room. So thank you to the organizing team and Nabila. I know you had a lot to do with that. Without further ado, I would like then to hand it over to Stefan.
Thank you very much, Birgit. And thank you, Nabila, for joining us, and welcome to everyone also from me present here and connected. So we're very pleased to share some of the key findings and lessons that came out of the IEG assessment, and were intended to inform and have informed the new FCV strategy. Before we start, I just wanted to also make a housekeeping announcement that we will be using a little bit of surveys and polls. So if you can pull out your phone already and then have it ready once we get to that particular slide, owing to the fact that it's after lunch and we want to engage with you as much as possible. So the scope of our assessment was basically the first World Bank group-wide FCV strategy, and we looked at the internal operational framework for FCV. So this is not an evaluation of outcomes in FCV countries. That's where we have the CPFs and other vehicles. But we focused here on the internal operations framework, focusing on financing instruments, programming, policies, partnerships, and personnel. And we will cover these issues today in turn. And the objective was precisely to inform the new FCV strategy that was just approved. Is that okay? There's still also 2 chairs here. What we found overall is that the previous strategy was timely, it was ambitious, and it was comprehensive. It's the first World Bank Group-wide strategy that was developed, and it has actually enabled the World Bank Group to advance its engagement with FCV issues and in countries affected by FCV, even amid heightened global volatility and crises. Remember, this period covered COVID. It covered the reversals in Afghanistan, in Sudan, in Myanmar, in many other countries. And we found overall that there was tangible progress in strengthening the operational framework for the World Bank to operate in FCV contexts. But the reforms of that framework were far from complete. So more needed to be done. And we noted, for example, the absence of an implementation plan to connect measures with responsibilities, milestones, and outcomes, and also to track the system to track the performance of the World Bank in FCV. And now we'd like you to take out your phones and scan the QR code. And we'll start with the first question as we're covering the 5 areas of the strategy, operational areas of the strategy, which is about financing and financing instruments. And so we'd like to, take the pulse of the room. What do you think, is the share of IDA financing, so concessional World Bank financing, that goes to FCS countries in 2024? So this is the share of IDA financing to the countries on the FCS list in 2024.
There we go.
There we see some results. Okay, still coming in. Let's see. Okay. So I think the bank has progressed a bit more than what we're seeing. So the good news is it is now at 33%, 2024. There's some background noise if someone. I'm going too fast.
A quarter of the room and online was correct.
Yes.
Okay. Good guess.
So, and what we're seeing here on the graph is that there's a significant increase in bank financing that goes to FCS. The green line is IDA financing, the share of financing. The other one is the total financing, so IBRD and IBRD and IDA going to FCS countries. And this was due to some reclassifications of large borrowing countries as FCS, so it was perhaps for the wrong reason. Countries slipping into fragility, for example, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Niger, Ukraine, not to forget, a very significant country. But it was also helped by the replenishment of the IDA FCV envelope, which helped really increase allocations to IDA eligible FCS countries. And while that was a positive, movement, we also noted in our assessment that countries that did benefit from the additional allocations under the IDA envelope, FCV envelope, had some issues around restructuring their portfolio, scaling up their portfolio in new areas that are more aligned with FCV milestones that the countries were seeking to achieve. And the second gap that we noted is that countries receiving prevention and resilience allocations were often already countries on the FCS list. They were already in some kind of conflict, but they were not the at-risk countries, which the new strategy is now actually focusing on. So far the first bucket. On the second bucket, discussing programming, so fragility sensitive programming, both for the public sector and also in terms of private sector approaches in FCS. And here again, we have a question for you, and I hope it's easy enough. So what are risk and resilience assessments, please, to the audience? It's the same code, so you don't need to, yeah. So we have a couple of options here. One is it a monitoring and evaluation tool? Is it a fragility and resilience diagnostic used by the World Bank Group, country partnership framework, or results framework? Let's see what, and this is 100%, so we have 100% alignment. I spoke too soon. And here, so some of the key findings is that risk and resilience assessments are indeed the core fragility diagnostic that inform fragility sensitive, fragility targeted strategies and operational engagements, programs and projects. And they've improved in quality and timeliness in terms of being able to inform country strategies and operations, but there's still gaps in their ability to inform operational decision making. So while country strategies now increasingly cover drivers of fragility and conflict, the adaptation of the project portfolio, the underlying project portfolio, is still a gap. So one of the findings was that many of the risk and resilience assessments are too high level, too generic, to actually inform the selectivity and design of specific operations or specific sector programs. Turning to jobs and the private sector, and this is a theme that you might have heard over the past couple of days quite a bit. So here, this would also require an adaptation of the World Bank's IFC's and MEGA's programs to the conditions of fragility and conflict. And here, our core finding is that the World Bank Group has not yet really developed an effective and coordinated approach for engaging both on public and private, the public and private instruments for private sector-led jobs in FCS. Now, as far as IFC and MEGA is concerned, they do face significant barriers in scaling up their portfolios due to high risk, including security risk, fragility risk, very short pipelines of bankable projects, and very poor business enabling environments. And so all of these actually call for a more holistic approach to engage in FCV, especially now under the new heading of jobs being the central theme of the new strategy. So now moving on to the third topic, which is about policies, processes, and procedures and practices, and adaptation and flexibility to these policies as they're applied in FCV countries. Now, within this, operational policy 7.30 is very relevant to FCS. And here again, we would like to ask you what it refers to. So is it applied in situations where no government is in place, or situations where a de facto government comes into power, or, very long paragraph, situations where a de facto government remains in power by means not provided in the country's constitution, such as a coup d'etat, revolution, etc. Let's see. And here again, we're aligned. And so what did we find
I think the long answer gave us away.
The long answer gave us away because it was too loyally. So we actually found that this operational policy helps the bank navigate its engagements and continue to remain engaged in areas where there has been an irregular power transfer, such as a coup d'etat or revolution, but that its application was not perceived as consistent across different countries. And so this would necessitate more legal guidance to staff, how to apply it, how to trigger it. And I think this is also a topic that has been picked up in the new FCV strategy. Overall, what we found is that as a result of available operational flexibilities, that project preparation times in FCS are quite similar to those in non-FCS, despite the higher complexity of the countries in which they're implemented. And now this gets me to the fourth dimension of the operational framework, which is around partnerships and partnerships with a more diverse group of partners, diplomatic, security, development partners, political organizations. And here, one area for the World Bank to increasingly engage, has been in the implementation of projects by using third-party implementing agencies. So this has been one modality that has been increasingly used. And so the question here is, if you have an estimate of what share the World Bank projects that are being implemented by a third-party agency, such as the UN or an international NGO, out of the total portfolio of projects in FCS.
By number or by value?
Yeah.
By number.
It doesn't say FCS.
By number.
In
In FCS, yeah.
Well, yeah, I know, but it says share World Bank projects.
In FCS.
I mean, this is a disclaimer in case I get the answer wrong.
We'll have to buy you a coffee if you got it wrong because of us. No, it's in FCS and the number of projects. And this is very close, so mea culpa. If the question wasn't clear. So the correct answer is 20% by number of projects, 10% by volume of commitments.
We accept both answers as correct.
So somewhere in the middle, yeah.
Yeah.
That brings it to 60%, so I guess. Yeah. And so while this is a significant number, it's perhaps less, a daunting number than is sometimes used in conversations. So it's an important operational modality, but it's not overwhelmingly so, right? And it is being used mostly in countries where the World Bank cannot directly operate through the government. So in the Yemens, Myanmar's, Afghanistan's, etc. And what we found in our analysis, actually, that most of these third-party implemented projects, that's what TPI stands for, do include development components, but they are somewhat more output-oriented than other FCS projects in FCS context. So service delivery-oriented, right? And they're actually performing quite well. But for them to have more long-term benefits, developmental benefits, they would need to integrate more systematically institution building and institutional capacity building into their design. And then internally facing World Bank staff or country management units, we saw that there was a clear need for more guidance to TTLs and country units around selection of TPI agencies, about their contracting, cost parameters, transparency, and so on, and exit strategies, because some of these arrangements have been going on for 10 years and more. And so this improved, guidance and practices would then enhance consistency, transparency, and also remove some of the perhaps misconceptions about the use of TPI. And I'm now coming to the final P, as we call it, which is personnel. So this is about staffing, skills, and incentives for staff working in FCS. And here I have a question which is perhaps a bit difficult for outside bank colleagues who are joining. But what do you think how many staff work in an FCS location? And I'll give you a little bit of a data point. So currently the World Bank has about 20,000, just about over 20,000 staff total. Let's see what people think. Good. So the 41%, 40% is correct. It was 1,154 at the end of fiscal 24. So good job. So plurality. Yeah. So one of the caveats that we have to mention here is that those 1,100 out of 20,000, they include staff that are located in an actual FCS country. We were not able to get the data for staff that work in a local hub, for instance, out of Ghana and work in West Africa, FCS countries, or others, or Dubai, and so on. So that data was not tracked or was not available to us, which of course is a much larger share. And also being located there has benefits, but also, it does not come with the same types of incentives that staff located in an actual FCS country come with. Now, and here our findings are a little bit more sobering than in the other 5 areas. So we actually didn't see that during the strategy period, there was much of an expansion of the pool of staff willing to deploy and work in FCS. We know there's a lot of staff highly motivated and highly qualified that are working in FCS countries, but we haven't been able to expand that pool during the strategy period. And attracting the right staff to these countries still remains a challenge. We put the number there, the actual staff growth was just about 1.4% per annum over the 5 years of the strategy period. And turning to incentives, I mean, here from a lot of our interviews with CMUs, with staff, with country managers, we understood that a lot of the promises that had been made at the outset of the previous strategy had actually not materialized, right, in terms of next career moves, career progression for staff working in and on FCS. So this is almost the end. I will just leave you with the three recommendations that we've formulated for management. So the first one, the need to develop and publish an implementation plan to set out objectives, outcomes, milestones, responsibilities. The second is to enhance FCV sensitive programming and approaches, both for public but also for private sector, leveraging the private sector. And the third one is to revamp precisely those financial and personnel resource frameworks that we talked about a minute ago.
And let me just come in a bit here to explain a bit why do we, as the independent evaluation group, give these recommendations and what does it mean? I wanted to wait until the end to come in on the role actually of the independent evaluation group and why this is important, what you saw and what the recommendations say. So we were in essence asked by the board before the new FCV strategy comes online to do as an independent agency an assessment of the performance of the first FCV strategy of the bank, as you've heard from Stefan, that covered the years 2020 to 25. And it should, which is our role, do two things: hold the bank and management accountable for what we set out to do in our strategies, but also second, to derive lessons learned and inform our internal operational staff about things, what worked, what didn't work, what could be done better, what could be done differently, how we could become better partners for all our countries, and in this case, FCS. And in that regard, you don't see that we give kind of ratings in this evaluation once you download it and read it in full, but it has a lot of lessons learned and these recommendations. And the recommendations are quite important because These recommendations go into what we call it the bank, the management action plan. And then for several years, we track and monitor together with the bank if these recommendations are implemented. So recommendations can not be taken lightly from the independent evaluation group because they, in essence, form a commitment, a several-year commitment for World Bank Group management to implement what is proposed as changes going forward. So for that reason, I want to leave them with you, even though we have a slide with all the links to the reports that are relevant and behind this evaluation, because I think this might be also a good segue into Nabila's discussion now to reflect perhaps a bit on what you've heard about the main findings and how this evaluation and how they also shaped or influenced the new strategy that was discussed at the board last week. And thank you again for making the time. We know this is a difficult, a very busy time for the FCV group organizing this wonderful fragility forum at the end of fiscal year. And we're really glad to have you here and look forward to your views.
Thank you for inviting me, and thanks everybody for attending, also online. I see a lot of interest in this session, and in a way, this is actually almost a perfect way to end this third day of the forum, because this has been a very busy time, as everybody knows, not only because of the Fragility Forum, which we're organizing, but also because we have just taken the strategy to the board. And so this session is sort of the culmination of both. It's, looking back at how we got to where we are in the strategy in the final few sessions of the forum. So it's a great closer to both. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes or so. Okay. So I want to say something first about the process, about how we worked together and how we benefited from IEG's work, and then I'll talk a bit about the substance, and then you'll be able to dive in quite a lot more. Don't worry about the slide just yet. So I want to say, I would say we benefited from IEG's evaluation far before this actually evaluation was done, or even started, I should say, because I think in the early days, we first benefited from IEG's inputs and advice in the midterm review of the last strategy. I think that's where we first started talking. We actually approached IEG and we said, we want to do a midterm review and we want to prepare for the next strategy, but we realized we didn't have a theory of change for our strategy. What should we do? So we sort of retrofit one even on the last strategy, just so that we could think about it more clearly. And then in the very early days when IEG was first starting to prepare for the evaluation, we were preparing for the next strategy. We worked really hard actually to align our timelines and make sure that we wouldn't get out ahead of the evaluation, because we wanted to make sure we benefited from it. And I really want to thank IEG actually for being so cooperative and sharing early findings when you could, and being there when we were first having our first conversations with all of the colleagues working on the different work streams that fed into it, and allowing us to get a sense of some of the early findings that you had, and then early well before it was finally published, I think in November, we were able to actually get a sense of the draft and where it was going as early as July. So we had a lot of upstream information about where this evaluation was heading, which really put us in a good position to be able to take into account all of these findings as we proceeded. So around that time, let's say, if we can go to the first slide, we actually started looking at IEG's findings and tried to, along with our own thinking and reflections, tried to put together some key lessons that we wanted to make sure that we covered in the next strategy. And this actually represents, you're sort of seeing a little bit under the hood here. This is actually some of the slides that we were using in the early discussions within the bank about what were the lessons learned. And you'll see there even that this is actually the exact slide. I didn't have much time to prepare slides, especially for this session. I just pulled from things we already had. what were some of the key lessons that we wanted to take into account? And I think that if you look at this, and I'm not going to read every word, you're going to recognize a lot of what was just presented, right? So, for example, we know that we had the quality of the diagnostics, and we're talking about RRAs primarily here, had improved, and it really had had an impact on CPS. And I just want to add another point. One other key source of information that we had when we're referring to IEG findings, we're not just referring to the evaluation of the strategy. Another big source of information for us was IEG's evaluation of 10 years of the World Bank's work on conflict countries. So that was published, I don't know, I'm sure you know.
21.
But yeah, so that was actually a very important source of information for us, because while it's not exactly the same scope, it was actually very valuable. So when we write IEG findings there, we're not just talking about this particular evaluation, we're talking about that one, and we're talking about the one on the private sector. And so we had a few other IEG evaluations, just to be clear. So, the quality of the diagnostics had improved, and it was actually informing our strategies, but it didn't always inform, decision-making. A lot of the way that we work is through our government-led model. And so sometimes we were not able to kind of really address some of these core issues and drivers. We also didn't see sort of this kind of adaptive decision-making during the implementation of a country strategy. And this is what linked to this idea of dynamic decision-making that came out of that 2021 evaluation. We're not taking anticipatory action based on a monitoring of risks. In terms of financing, some of what was said, some of the financing that is available is really driven mostly by kind of the momentum of the program, which is similar to the way it was framed in the evaluation findings. On the private sector and jobs, we could see that we actually did have progress in certain areas, but probably one of the biggest gaps, we really had not really cracked this one World Bank group approach. We can move to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of remaining engaged, that was probably one of the strongest positive findings that was really considered a success and appreciated. It was not at all to be taken for granted, I would say, if we go back 10 years ago, and that was really a positive outcome. But at the same time, we realized that there wasn't really that much guidance on third-party implementation, which was such an essential element of being able to remain engaged. OP 730 was a really flexible policy. It was very helpful, but because it's so flexible and has to be applied on a case-by-case basis, it was perceived as inconsistent, which it's not so much inconsistent as it needs to adapt to every little, every completely unique situation that we face. In operations, we were able to demonstrate that we could achieve results in those places, but a lot of times we wondered if we were scaling up almost too quickly. Were we getting ahead of the absorptive capacity? So you can see we were really thinking hard about what worked, what didn't, and trying to take that into the development of the strategy. And I'll say from a process standpoint, we almost literally looked finding by finding, right? To see, like, did we miss anything? Have we taken into account, is there something that we can do here with the next strategy? And, this area on staffing that it remains challenging to attract staff. The promised career incentives really just did not materialize. So this was the stuff that just so that you can kind of get a sense of what was happening within the World Bank Group. This is what was being presented within the World Bank to managers, to directors, to senior management, to talk about where do we need to go with the strategy. So we can move on from here. And that actually, we sort of collated that into these 4 areas that actually ended up driving the way we formulated the strategy. So we really want to be much more oriented towards risk management, which has to be a lot more dynamic. And that has to be linked to risk management during country program implementation. And we're really actually, it was fortunate that the country engagement process, for those of you outside the bank, we also have revamped that at the same time. And so we got lucky in a sense that the revamping of the country engagement policy and process in the bank included much more emphasis on implementation and adaptive implementation. So we were able to piggyback onto that and say, during that adaptive implementation, if it's an FCV context, it has to be informed by a bigger emphasis on risks and adapting to those risks. The second lesson about really trying to recognize what we can actually affect with our development financing, being more discerning in terms of where we can actually have an impact and where there are broader political security aspects that need to be taken into account, and trying to make sure that where we are making those investments, those actually can have a lasting impact. The whole jobs agenda in the World Bank Group, just recognizing that as really an area that needs much more work. And I'll tell you from now, like a spoiler, it's not resolved in the strategy. It still says we actually need an MSME strategy, and that's going to have elements on FCV, and we'll figure it out. But there are some things I think that are breakthroughs that are in there if you read closely. And last but not least, and really not last but not least, is a recognition that all of this really needs to be institutionalized. We need a lot more adaptation of our tools, our partnerships, our knowledge, and our staffing approaches to really embed this in the bank's system. So that's how it all came together, and we can move to the next slide. And I want to give you a sense of how kind of the thinking evolved, and that's what brought us to our 4 strategic shifts. Anticipate better, adopt a differentiated approach, develop this one World Bank Group jobs agenda, and then develop our institutional elements, the partnerships, the operational toolkit, and all of that. So moving on, that's the process, and that is sort of tipped into the substance of what that meant for the strategy. If we can move to the next slide. And then what we did is also we built that into a theory of change, because we wanted to have a theory of change this time, and so this is the theory of change. Actually, if you download the document, you'll find this theory of change in the document. And the idea is that we were saying, look, what this strategy is about is certain strategic shifts in how we do things. And if we make these strategic shifts in how we are doing things within World Bank, that will be implemented through our country programs, because everything that we're doing is going to go to the rubber will hit the road once it gets into a country program. So that will actually affect the way we implement our country engagement programs and what those country engagement programs consist of. And that will give us different country engagement outcomes. That's our theory. If we do things differently at this level of these 4 shifts, that will affect our country engagements. And then as a result, we will get these different outcomes, mainly in what we call jobs, but that's jobs writ large. I just want to emphasize that means foundational infrastructure, services, reforms, and very specifically engagements with the private sector. The parts of the justice and governance aspects that the bank can engage on or has expertise on or is within its mandate. And then if we are partnered effectively with other partners that can deal with security and political aspects, to the extent that that aligns, we can contribute to peace and prosperity as a higher order outcome. And it's always very scary to put that kind of thing at the top, but I'm assuming everybody in this session knows when we say higher order outcomes that we're contributing to, that we mean that very humbly, right? So that's the theory of change that was put in place. And then in terms of these strategic shifts, if we can go, I think I have another slide, but I didn't want to. Okay, so the slide I put there was just the link to the strategy. But in each of those strategic shifts, we have actually committed to institutional outcomes, and as well as actions that we will be taking. I think after that slide with the QR code,
So you have a secret one?
I have because it's just the tables, and I just want to give you a sense of what it looks like. Within the strategy, we've identified institutional outcomes. We have how we're going to track progress on those outcomes, notionally what the indicators are, but IEG will understand we need to test these out and make sure that they make sense. In addition to that, we also have a set of actual actions that are sort of the first steps along the way. So you'll see there, for example, on anticipating better, we're saying the outcome we're trying to achieve here is that the World Bank Group actually uses advanced tools to better anticipate risks. And we have proactive strategic preparedness actions that are taken in countries facing those risks. So in terms of being able to track that that's happening, we expect to be able to see that on a regular basis. We are we produce those methodologies and are applying them on a regular basis. what I don't have up there are the actions, and the actions are very specific things like develop the methodology, et cetera. So we've actually created these institutional outcomes with indicators to measure them, and the first year's set of actions that will get us along our way. And so if I talk about some of those first year actions, I think you'll recognize a lot of links to what Stefan just presented. Revise the risk and resilience assessment methodology. And the way we're revising that methodology is actually to address some of the shortcomings that were discussed, or produce new directive and guidance on OP 730 to make sure it's consistently implemented, or introduce a way to actually understand who is working on FCV in our institution, whether it's on the ground because they are stationed there, or because they've gone there on mission, or if they have very substantive engagement from anywhere else. And how do we measure that and start to use that in career planning and progression? So we have specific actions on all of these. And the idea is that we focus on making sure that we undertake those actions in the first year. We set these indicators up and have regular reporting to the board, and then can adapt along the way during implementation. So that's basically kind of the story of how the strategy came to be where it was, and really how IEG's evaluations and findings, I would say, are very, on this evaluation and previous one, were very much really part of the fabric of what really was woven together to produce this strategy.
Good. Thank you so much, Nabila. This is great. And I wanted to ask Stefan if we will give you the links of all the evaluations that Nabila kindly referred to, that the new strategy was drawing on. And I think this is amazing. You got in 14 minutes the whole history of FCV engagement from 22 to 25 and the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we were very efficient. Thank you to Stefan for presenting for IEG, and to Nabila for making the links to the new strategy. And we have really ample time now to hear more from you. You are the practitioners that work on FCV, and we want to know from you a bit how you look at the findings. Do they resonate with you? Which of the ones we presented quite a few, and you've heard also in the new strategy a lot of issues that are addressed, but what do you think could be the most important things we collectively as the World Bank Group should focus on to be more effective going forwards in FCV countries? And I open the floor online, but also to people in the room. And please feel free to share what is perhaps for you the most challenging thing when you work in FCS. That helps us a lot to understand what the main challenge is. I don't know who's moderating.
We have one question.
So online, I will get help.
We have some questions online. Shall I
Should we have
pose?
a couple in the room and a couple online? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I know you are here, and
Thanks for the presentation. It was super interesting. I'm Alice, I'm a social specialist with IEG, and I work on risk management. So I saw that one of the findings was that risk needs to be an upfront thinking, etc. And I was wondering whether there was any thinking about how to involve risk upfront in the strategy making, in the CPF, and in those outcome-oriented indicators that are included upfront, both from the FCV people working on conflict sensitivity, but also people working on environmental and social risks, because we know that these are exacerbated in these countries. And the second question is more on the private sector kind of thinking in terms of how it is can really work towards that strategy.
So my name is Tano. I'm an economist working for the macro department, and I previously worked on evaluation. Something that we've noted in sort of like attracting financing to FCVs is that trade-off between increasing financing to have impact in those countries where it is needed, and the financial aspect of it, like the risk management aspect of it, sort of like or an organization being exposed in countries that are risky from a risk management perspective. And that has been a challenge before, but I see that here, the increase in financing, either financing to, I think, 15 to 33% is presented as something positive. So is it that this challenge that came before that trade-off that was that staff was facing in terms of attracting financing to those countries has totally disappeared now, or did you have to assess that increase, both in terms of having impact, but also in terms of how the bank is exposed in countries that are risky? Thank you.
Perhaps one more. Thank you, Tano. And then we go online, maybe 3-3. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask about the third-party implementation. So you had a finding about that on the slide. And so I was interested to hear a little bit more about what kind of challenges you found and what the issues are. We also face the same thing with the Asian Development Bank, but then also moving forward, what will the World Bank, or what kind of vision do you have for making TPI better? You're talking about, you lack clear guidance. Like, are you thinking about a separate modality? Will that fall under procurement? How might that come together? Thanks.
Okay, great. Let's take a couple online and then I think we can, Lila, Stefan and I can tackle the
We have a question from Amalia online, who has the impression that current portfolios are simply tweaked for FCV rather than designed to address FCV drivers. And she's wondering if the evaluation had any insight on that. A question from Tala on whether community-based operations are considered third-party implementation. And there's a question from Abid on what the major focus of FCV projects are. They focus more on infrastructure or provision of goods and services.
Okay, great. It's the first excellent round. I wanted to give it to Nabila on the upstream risk, how the first question on how this is planned to be addressed. And then we can elaborate a bit more on the private sector findings, what we found as challenges. I will think about Tana's question on financing, and on TPI, we will also elaborate a bit more. And then the programming, and can you repeat the last one? Well, the major
On the overall focus of FCV projects.
Is it infrastructure or
projects.
services?
Okay, good.
Infrastructure.
Do you want to kick it off?
I mean, in terms of the risks, the risk and resilience assessment is the primary diagnostic that we use for this, and it's called the risk and resilience assessment because it includes a discussion on risks. Depending on, which one and which country, it'll show up in different ways in terms of how it's shaping the country program. In some of the most risky environments, there's actually some additional elements that you'll find in CPFs, and I would recommend actually that you read some, and you'll see what I'm referring to. So for example, say in Yemen, there's something called entry criteria for access, right? Which actually is really bringing in some very practical elements, saying at a project by project level, we have these criteria in terms of where we will actually engage and where we will not, because of exactly those kinds of risks. It could be security risks. In Afghanistan, the same thing exists. Their part of the criteria is we have to be able to implement a project that is for women and by women. Otherwise, we won't do it. Myanmar has it. So some of the riskiest environments you will actually find, in addition to how the risks are reflected in the shaping of the program, you will actually find some additional operational tools that are embedded to how that program is implemented that takes into account these risks on a very granular basis. Hope that helps. The second part of your question was about IFC. So I breezed over this a little bit when I said it's actually not resolved yet in the strategy. But what the strategy does say is that there's an MSME strategy that's under development, and that is going to also address how we address MSMEs in FCV. But there's a few things I would bring to your attention. There's a paragraph somewhere in the strategy that talks about things that IFC has already said it's doing or will do. And specifically looking at KPIs, return on investment expectations, looking at legal and credit requirements, and really differentiating that for FCV. So I think that's very substantial. We'll see what that looks like when this all gets put together, but that seemed like a pretty strong statement. Also doing more upstream advisory in FCV and a commitment to do that, and also to increase staffing. So there's quite a lot that you'll find. It's all packed into one little paragraph, but if you really think about what that implied for IFC, it's pretty significant. So I would watch that space.
Great. Thank you, Nabila. Stefan, why you don't come in before I wrap it up?
Sounds good. Yeah, so I think there was one question on programming online. So in our analysis, we also found that, the number of projects, the share projects that actually pick up specific drivers of fragility and conflict has increased over time. But this is more so for projects in conflict-affected countries, that Nabila was referring to, because it's easier to make that connection, right? But the bottom line was that we see less of the transformational change that I think the online participant was asking about, and we see more about addressing the impacts of fragility and conflict. So this is the more, the trend that we are observing. It is very hard, right, to come up with a clear classification of what is fragility sensitive or not sensitive. But let me leave it there. Over to you, or do you want me to add anything on the private sector?
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Nabila has already said, that there's been some new development in the new strategy in terms of these commitments. I mean, our findings basically confirmed that, the traditional business model for IFC and for MIGA, relying on foreign direct investment, cross-country investment, gold-plated investors that come into a country, is not happening in Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, any of those countries. But there is a domestic private sector, which the strategy, I think, rightly points out, and that creates goods and services, employs people. And I think that is the big challenge for both IFC and MIGA and for the World Bank to come up with approaches and business models to go down market enough to reach those clients. And it's not just about MSME financing, because many of those clients, they have very low capacity. So it's not so much a lack of financing. This might be a tertiary or fourth order constraint, but it's a lot of other practical issues that would require a kind of, in my view, ecosystem approach of addressing many different constraints that affect the private sector to grow, create jobs and hire more people. So I think the strategy is a first step, but we'll see how much farther it needs to go.
Okay, let me come in a bit on the question on financing from Tano. So what we could see, and it's encouraging, that the financing that goes to FCS countries as a share, right, of all bank resources has increased quite dramatically. Now, the caveat is, as you've heard in the presentation, some of it is really because they were made huge and countries that went into conflict, and that of course skews the picture then a bit. Where we would say, well, these are maybe not the traditional countries that had long-term FCS challenges, but that recently just fell into conflict. But overall, we could see that this is frankly a need, right? Even if you think about, well, this is perhaps just happening, countries go out in and out of conflict. It seems like this is a growing problem, and the bank is answering it by putting more resources into these countries. And specifically, when we looked at the IDA FCV envelope, right, for the poorest country, it's countries that they are and that are eligible for IDA, it really enabled through the FCV envelope a much more structured approach around the milestones of the policy-based dialogue that are part of that. So there is not just more resources going to FCV, but you can see that these resources have also incentives to really look at what are the drivers of fragility and how can they be addressed through the milestones. I think in general, though, which relates to one of the question, I think, from online a bit, is that although we saw, right, the scaling up of financing going to FCS countries, it did look that a lot of the scaling up ended up in scaling up of existing projects. So we didn't necessarily see a new and a very different portfolio across these countries. So more money went into FCS countries, but often for the same activities that were done for a long time. And this is perhaps the main message actually from the financing part, that it's great to scale up, but let's think what we do with the extra money. Do we do things differently really in FCS countries, or try different things? Or do we just think throwing more money at it will be the solution? Okay, so let me stop there on that. But I wanted to reflect a bit on the TPI question, the third-party implementation question. So again, it's a bit the glass half full and still half empty. So it was essential, right, that there was this operational flexibility. That is a main finding of the evaluation, to allow the bank to continue to remain engaged and operate in circumstances where it would be under normal bank rules not be easy for us, or not at all possible for us to engage. So the TPI modality really provided that operational and also partnership modality to work with other partners on the ground when we cannot, as World Bank staff, be on the ground. And the main challenge is, though, what we observed is, how do we get from something that looks more like a humanitarian response, which is traditionally going through UN agencies, which are often third-party implementer, and that are very output focused. So this is what Stefan meant. This is our evaluation language. When we look at how many vaccinations are provided, that's an output. That is not an outcome. That fragility, as you saw from Nabila's beautiful theory of change, is decreasing. So the question is really how to use TPI to move from more of these outputs to outcomes, development outcomes. And that is a key discussion we had with management. How do we design going forward TPI engagements where we have a larger development component rather than just more what looks like humanitarian support? And that mainly, as you as practitioners know, involves capacity building and institution building, because you don't want to be in TPI forever. You don't want to have UN agencies and other NGOs and international NGOs and us, frankly, to be there, to be the provider of all these services. And that is also something we could see could be strengthened going forward. And internally, as you've heard from Stefan, the flexibility of doing TPI led to a lot of variety of TPI engagements within the bank without a clear kind of guidance or framework. This is how much whatever markup there is, right, for covering the security, for instance, for the implementer. It was done more on a case-by-case basis. And the thinking or the advice is let's do it more systematically going forward, which is easier for our operational staff, but also for our partners, right, to have a bit more transparency and clarity how TPI arrangements are managed. Let me stop here.
Thank you. I wanted to just talk about two topics, TPI and how do we actually see FCV-related outcomes in our country programs. First on TPI, we do have some actions on TPI kind of in the more technical way, develop some guidance, cost effectiveness and things like this. So we have some operational pieces, but I think the most important element that's related to TPI in the strategy is what we say about how we adapt, take a differentiated approach in crisis countries. And so what we're talking about there is that we want to focus on how we can find identified pathways for delivery or modalities for delivery with potential to last. So we're talking about how do we work with partners that if we're delivering through those modalities, those will stay. They will not fade away right after the project. So we're talking about, and this relates actually to the online question too. How do you deliver through private sector, local platforms, local institutions, and NGOs? How do we make those relationships so that those modalities are actually have lasting potential, and therefore we're not doing something that's just short term. So I think that's a really important piece. It doesn't say the word TPI there, but it's absolutely part of the answer. And then in terms of how are we trying to move further down the line in terms of FCV outcomes in the strategies? And I think for that, there's a sort of a chain of ideas that's in the strategy. If you read it closely, you'll see it. The idea there is, first of all, what we're saying is that in RRAs, in our risk and resilience assessments, we want to try to identify what we're calling trajectory shifting actions. This is a very tall order, right? In terms of what kind of changes, what kind of policies, reforms, actions might actually help to change things in this country that is heading in the wrong direction. And some of those things might be related to economic development and some of them might not be. So you can imagine this is going to be very, very difficult for us. But that's the challenge we've set for ourselves, is that we should have a sense in the diagnostic what those are. And then that links up to our country engagement process, where we should then say, so based on our dialogue with the government, do we think they're committed to any of this? And then if they are, strategically, us as the World Bank Group, do we think that we can engage on this and can actually make an investment here? If all of those three things happen, we'll start to see those FCV related outcomes show up in the CPFs. Will it say with an arrow, I am an FCV related outcome? No, because our clients will not like that. But that's the idea, that trying to see how it can become embedded in the way we do business. So we shall see.
And Nabila actually brought me to the second question I would also have to you, because you can see, right, what comes up a lot is also for us evaluator to try to understand how do we measure meaningful results in FCS context, and how does success in FCS look like, right? And I wanted to also ask you as practitioners, how do you think we could measure success in FCV countries better? It's not a trivial question, as you see from our theory of change attempts, and thinking especially also for us, it's the independent evaluation group about how to evaluate actually outcomes in FCV countries. Okay. Nabila has to go.
I do. I didn't see it.
Okay,
There you go, Fabi. Answer.
my name is Vasco Bertucci. I have worked
Thank you.
in post-conflict countries for almost 20 years. Staff member of the Southern, starting with Bosnia, with which country it's all next country, banking, moving to conflict or conflict. 9 years in Kabul, several years in Africa. I have no questions, but I have kind of a comment to make your report a little bit more accurate. I would somebody who has worked for several months on tracking the third-party implementation involvement in terms of the numbers and the way and the modalities, and to produce a paper on it. I would really be very cautious about the figure that you have mentioned here, about how much third-party involvement was included during this strategy. I'd very much like to hear about sources of these figures. What I'm trying to say is that it is a significant, we all know, it is a significant involvement of the third-party implementation, but I'm not sure that figures you mentioned here are defendable.
Okay.
And I think would be highly challengeable, even by the board of directors to go ahead with that. If you want, we can talk more about that, about my work later, and I can give you some kind of insights. But I would refrain from going with the definitive figures, and even with approximation, because of the problems that exist there in terms of how much the third parties are obliged to report to the bank, especially new agencies, and etc. So this is just like advice. and you decide whatever you want. Second is about the recruitment and about locking the appropriate staff to work in SCV. As somebody who has worked there and met so many staff, it would be interesting to know the figure that you mentioned, how much locally, local staff was involved versus international. I'm sure that supply side is not a problem, and it would be very good for you to look more into the causes. What are the real problems that the bank is lacking appropriately on outside staff? I think we would come to things, judging from my experience. And I'm already retired, say whatever I feel. I think it's incentivization very much, and it's also how to improve the bank's recruitment process to meet supplies. And third, we all know that working in the SCVs is not business as usual. It requires a lot of risk-taking approach, obviously there. But what I would be very interesting to see in your report, how much innovative approach was implemented during the implementation of the strategy, because, as I said, innovation is something that needs big changes in the countries that are involved.
Great, thank you so much. We come to the answers, but I wanted to check if there are any other questions or
So there's some
Online.
and there were some related questions online. There was one question up from Nairobi from Dalia, I believe, that's on the kind of continuity of knowledge and experience. How is that preserved in the face of high turnover in FCB environments? And whether there were any insights from the evaluation on that. And there was a related question on whether there were any efforts to kind of track FCB skills among staff.
okay, great. Any other comments?
I just had I want to commend you because I think the intellectual direction is brilliant, and we really are happy for the bank. My name's Georgia Sambanoris, and I'm a technical project design person on private sector economic growth. And I was just wondering, in terms of the SME strategy for jobs, in terms of the resources going to SMEs, how are you working with the banks so that the distribution of cash to SME startups is evaluated? And I wanted to bring up the model that the bank and formerly USAID use with the British on the Youth Business International, which was aimed at disadvantaged youth to do things like sanitation, water distribution, grooming, health. And it was the corporations that partnered to distribute with the banks to ensure the distribution of the resources, because the trickle down effect doesn't always happen.
Okay, great. Maybe one more online, Will, and maybe we make this the last round because I know time is.
There was a question from Stavros that he wasn't hearing anything about security, or he was just concerned that security is not strictly a UN objective, but it also includes community resilience, youth, and gender issues. And he was wondering about the lack of those, discussing those issues and how they relate to security.
So we will do our best as the IEG team to answer these questions. I just wanted to say on the SME strategy, this is forward-looking, and in the making, we are not perhaps the right one. So maybe you want to go back to Nabila or the team to see what their thinking is. We can say a few things, but we are not part of that process, of course. I wanted to address the two issues that are on the numbers and what is under the hood of the evaluation, and the continuity issue of how to ensure in the FCS and everywhere in development, frankly, continuity of learning and in our operations. On the numbers, so I can completely assure you, please feel free to go to the report. All the numbers are in there. They're all vetted. It's peer reviewed. These are the numbers that is based on what the bank is tracking and what the board, by the way, approves that goes for TPI. So this is all approved by the board. This is not a management decision when TPI is used. So I don't know if you perhaps thought this is beyond the World Bank Group, but what we do in our evaluations is just assess the World Bank Group performance. So we don't look at everything in the world. So, and that is what we as evaluators, of course, sign off on. We have the numbers also on the staffing, how many are local, we have them by grade, by region. So I think if it's of interest also for your research, we can discuss how we can work together on that. I thought the question on the continuity of having institutional knowledge of how we work in development and what we've learned from our operations, which is really important, right, from an evaluative perspective, that we do monitor, we evaluate and learn, is actually encapsulated not in one of these on the screen evaluation so much, but we have a self-standing evaluation on learning in operations that is exactly tackling that issue, how the World Bank Group in general is or is not ensuring that there is continuity in engagement and in learning through our operations. And they're quite interesting findings related to that. And maybe we can put the link to that into the chat because it's a whole another universe where we discuss how important, for instance, within the World Bank Group and our own institution, tacit knowledge is, right? It is, as many of you worked with the bank, I'm assuming, or know the bank a bit, and it often does depend on the person on the ground that knows the people and knows how to navigate and get things done. And the evaluation, one of this evaluation's finding is exactly, we need to be better on how we manage this tacit knowledge when people move on to next assignments, and that there are ways to and tools how to do that, and that's especially important, of course, in FCV. So it's a really excellent point on that. But let me give Stefan, as the lead author of the evaluation, the last word, who did the most heavy lifting on it and deserves to close this.
Thanks. Well, it was a big team, so not just me. Yeah, I just also wanted to say, as to underline what Birgit said. So we used bank data that for HR and also for third-party implementation data. So our data is accurate to the extent that the bank data is accurate, but we know that it's not 100% tracked, right? It's spreadsheet and so on. So maybe that's how some of the discrepancies or impressionistic differences come to pass. On the SME strategy, I mean, we have an SME evaluation that is a couple of years old, but if that's of interest, we could share that. I mean, I think there is a problem that affects financial intermediation and lines of credit operations. That's very difficult to track the downstream effects and who are the actual beneficiaries. Is there firm growth, firm survival, and so on. So what is usually being tracked is how many beneficiaries are women, youth, refugees, and so on. But it doesn't go much further than that. So that would be a discussion perhaps also to bring up, going forward, because that's a new strategy now being developed. And I don't think I have any. Oh, there was a question on the sectoral focus of our work in the World Bank's work in FCS countries. So I think that has changed a bit. It's not really part of this evaluation, but there was years ago much more of a focus on institution building and governance. And then that has then pulled back a little bit also in the context of this third-party implementation of remaining engaged in some countries where service delivery to citizens has become more prominent in countries where the government itself is no longer able, for various reasons, to provide those services in education, health, and social protection. So that share has grown, and I think infrastructure is also important, but I would have to look at the numbers and see what exactly the current picture is. But there has been a bit of evolution. And let me stop there. Thank you.
And it also depends, right? During COVID, for instance, we had a large increase in health and interventions, even in FCS. So it's not easy to just look back a few years and says this is a trend, right? There are shocks often that also impact a lot how the portfolio evolved. Let me close the session. I think we had a super interesting discussion. Thank you for all the participants online and for you all in the room. We're really happy to interact with you also on one-on-one. If you have any other follow-ups, either for information or for discussions around specific topic, we invite you to, of course, read the evaluation and any related FCV evaluations that IEG did recently. We have an excellent webpage, thanks to our team that also facilitated the session. Thank you very much. And we really look forward to engaging with you. If you have also any views of what are your questions that you would like us to evaluate, especially on FCS, please let us know, and we're happy to have a conversation. Thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.